So, I want to thank, of course, PAS and Marshall for setting up this event and for Shenandoah for hosting it. I've met a bunch of students here already, some of whom I already knew and some of whom I didn't. And everybody's been really hospitable and really nice. I need to thank my lovely assistant Rick in the back of the room, who on very short notice endured, went showerless and endured a sausage McMuffin to be here this morning. So I really appreciate that. And then two folks that I used as I guess you might say primary sources for this are some friends of mine. John Phipps, who's known in the hip-hop community in DC as Gotti, who's produced a bunch of Chuck Brown stuff, and I was able to sort of tap him as a resource about the music, and also a gentleman by the name of Jim McFalls, who's a fantastic jazz trombonist, and if you've never heard Jim play, you really need to. He played with Chuck for a few years, and starting in about 2001, and so I was able to email with him and get some insight into the music. So those are my thanks. Rick, are we kind of ready to go?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. Well, I want to start out with some music. So about 20 years ago, I was coming home from a show in DC, and there's a bunch of us in the car. My buddy Todd's Ford Fairmont, and we were driving home from the show, and he was trying to find music on the radio, and what came on when he turned the dial, probably to something like 88.5 or 89.3, was something that probably sounded kind of like this. Immediately I was really intrigued, and I was like, what is that? I have to know what that is. And one of the guys in the car, who was way hipper than me, said, oh, you never heard of go-go? And I said, no. But it's really not an unusual experience for somebody growing in the suburbs, even though we were 15 or 20 miles outside DC, did not have heard of go-go, which had been thriving in DC at that point for like over 10 years. Because a lot of people talk about how, oh, nobody knows about go-go outside of DC. Well, they literally mean nobody knows about go-go outside of like the Beltway. Maybe some folks in Maryland, but it's a unique art form to the city, and it involves group drumming. You will almost never find a go-go band that doesn't have at least a drummer and a percussionist, if not several. And so I think I need to say up front, I am not a go-go expert. I'm a fan of the music. I've never played in a go-go band. I think, like most of you guys who know the music, I've always wanted to play in a go-go band, because it sounds like a lot of fun. But the decision I made for doing this clinic about go-go today was actually in part to force me to learn more about the music, because I had applied some beats that kind of sounded like go-go, and talked to some other people. In fact, the gentleman that I ran into in the men's room earlier was like, yeah, I've always heard go-go on the radio, but I don't really know what it's about. And that's been our experience. And as drummers, and especially in the PAS community, there's really not a lot of overlap between the go-go community and sort of the scholarly, PAS thing. And I feel like it's such fun music, and it's valid, it's from DC, it's our music, that I thought it would be a really fun clinic to do. So before I get started, I just want to figure out who's here. Everyone here, I guess, is a percussionist, or maybe a future percussionist, right? Does everyone a drum set player, or do we have kind of a mix of like some folks are into the orchestral thing, some folks are into maybe the world thing? Okay, show of hands, who plays drum set? All right, awesome, great, good. All right. Well, this is going to be fun. So I don't want to do too much talking. I have a habit of doing that, and so I'm gonna try to play a lot of recordings, and then demonstrate some stuff on drums. We're gonna have some guys come up and kind of jam with me and sort of try to figure out the go-go thing. Does everyone have a handout? There should have been one on your chair. If you don't have a handout, please let me know. I think we have some extras. Okay. So the first page, I'm not going to go through the first page and just read it out loud to you. You don't need me to do that. But I do want to talk about a couple of the important figures in music. And of course, the name that really is synonymous with go-go is Chuck Brown. Chuck Brown is an institution. It's not, you can't even really talk about his influence on the music. He is the music. He is pretty much, without question, credited with inventing the style of music that is go-go. Now, when I looked for the definition of go-go, when I was trying to put together this handout, I did what I think all of us would do, and I went straight to Wikipedia. And the definition is sorely lacking. It says go-go is a subgenre of funk. Okay. Certainly, go-go grew out of funk. I think if you listen to especially a lot of early Chuck Brown stuff, you hear a lot of echoes of like early Cool and the Gang, maybe Ohio Players. But there's something about this stuff that is not just funk. There's a feel that almost sometimes calls to mind reggae. There's always extra percussion, usually on instruments that are from the Afro-Cuban tradition, even though they're not usually necessarily played the same way they would be in that tradition. There's a lot about it that makes it very unique. There's a tradition of call and response vocals, because this is party music. It's music that grew up in the club. And so to just simply say that it's funk and ignore the fact that there's rhymes and a hip-hop element to a lot of go-go stuff, and there's all this extra percussion, and there's feels, there's a feel that's unique to the music, I think kind of doesn't really do the music justice. So it is just words, but I think it is important when we're defining it to really kind of talk about where the music comes from. So the first, and unfortunately some people would say the only #1 hit that go-go ever had is actually a song that doesn't, it's Chuck Brown, but it doesn't sound a lot like go-go. It's got some elements of it, but this tune is called Bust 'Em Loose. I think this came out in 1979, and this was Chuck Brown's big #1 R&B hit. I think it was #1 on the Billboard charts for like 3 months in 1979. And so some of you that may have never thought you've never heard go-go may have actually heard this.